Since a gunman shot more than 50 people dead in Christchurch, New Zealand 3 months ago, there's been a growing focus on the threat the far right poses. To understand it, you need to go online into the digital world.
There are a lot of calls for violence. On a daily basis, we're seeing several calls for violence across the world.
And this programme has been speaking to one woman who spent the last 3 years infiltrating its international networks.
I started really looking at Islamist, extremist inspired attacks, Islamist terrorism, and jihadist materials and online propaganda of jihadist networks. And then, especially when the murder of Joe Cox happened, that kind of prompted me to look more into the far-right channels, and because I could see so many parallels in the ways that they were exploiting this whole new media ecosystem. So usually I would set up an avatar account or several avatar accounts to get into especially the encrypted platforms, because some of the conversations really take place in some very hidden corners of the internet. And that means that a lot of the groups have adopted stricter recruitment policies and vetting procedures. Sometimes they would start by asking a set of questions, or some of them would even ask you to do an online Skype interview, for example, or a voice chat on Discord. And others, the really extreme ones, would even ask for things like background checks, but also genetic ancestry materials that you would have to share, or even things like I've been asked to, for example, share a picture of my wrist to prove that I'm white.
And you're saying even genetic tests, so that you can get those online tests to show your DNA and your ancestry history.
Exactly.
They'd ask for that to make sure you're...
There are groups, neo-Nazi groups, that are asking for genetic test results, yes.
The far right inhabits both the mainstream of the internet and some of its darker corners. People may first see material on mainstream sites like YouTube or Instagram. Some might make more direct contact on platforms used by computer gamers to communicate. The best known is Discord. Or they might use encrypted messaging platforms which offer more security, like Telegram, which has been used by jihadists as well. Or they might go to websites which focus on free speech, where extreme ideas can find a home, like 8chan or Gab. And then there are sites created by the far right themselves, where there's less risk of being taken offline.
In many cases, far-right propagandists, but it's the same on the jihadist side, have a very well thought through strategy of step-by-step radicalization and tapping into grievances, tailoring the messages to the grievances of certain target audiences. So for example, when they would try to recruit someone from the ultra-libertarian platforms, they would emphasize topics around freedom of speech to tap into those grievances, which means that in some cases they manage to groom individuals and to lure sometimes even apolitical members into their networks that would then get further radicalized once they've joined.
The gaming platform Discord, with its anonymity, has particularly been used by extremists to communicate and plan real-world events.
That really started with the organization of the Charlottesville protests, where we spent the 2 months in the lead-up to the protests in the Discord channels that were actually talking about the logistics and organizing the Charlottesville rally on Discord.
In a statement, Discord said its guidelines prohibit hatred, harassment, threatening messages and calls to violence, and that it investigates and takes immediate action against any reported violation. Were you surprised by how big the rally was, or what happened there?
I wasn't, no, to be honest, we weren't really surprised in how big the rally was, and we were also not surprised that it escalated in violence. Having monitored the chat rooms, we saw pictures of guns being posted. We thought that it would actually be a very dangerous kind of protest, and a very dangerous setting in which they were protesting, because there was so much hate that already accumulated in the run-up to it.
At Charlottesville, a car rammed those protesting against the far right. But now, discussing and encouraging violence has become almost routine online.
On a daily basis, we're seeing several calls for violence across the world, because some of these activists would be based in Germany, others would be based in Australia. So it's also very, I think, a tricky territory for the security forces to monitor and to keep track of everything that's happening there.
Do you feel that they are?
I think there was a time lag in responding to the threat of these alternative platforms that have been used by the far right. Because ISIS and the jihadist threat was really taken a lot more seriously earlier on. And so some of these platforms have just remained unregulated, but also in some of the cases unobserved.
How do you react, or what do you do if you see someone who looks like they're actually organising violence or inciting violence or discussing carrying out violence?
So we usually flag it immediately to the security forces in the responsible area if we know what the geography is, or to the tech firms. In some of the cases, we just flag it to both, especially if it's something that is on a mainstream social media platform. We'd flag it to Twitter or Facebook to immediately have it taken down. But if it's in the encrypted platforms, it's a matter of flagging it to, for example, to Discord. They are also really attempting to take down some of the groups.
Do you have to be careful how long you spend on them? Because it must be slightly disturbing to be reading this material and watching it constantly.
Yeah, it's definitely very disturbing, and especially when spending too much time in some of the really vile neo-Nazi or white supremacist chat rooms. That is something where I then sometimes do a social media detox for a few days to keep away from these materials. But to be honest, Christchurch was a moment where, to me, that was really, I think, one of the most emotional or moving points, because it's just made all of the things that I'm seeing on a daily basis so much more tangible and so much more terrible, in the sense that it can just immediately translate itself into a real-world attack.